Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
North Dakotans for Public Schools is dedicated to protecting and strengthening public education in North Dakota. United by the belief that public schools are the cornerstone of our communities, North Dakotans for Public Schools fights against harmful policies like voucher schemes that divert resources away from public schools. By bringing together educators, parents, school boards, and citizens, North Dakotans for Public Schools amplifies the voices of those who understand the critical role public schools play in shaping the future of North Dakota's children and communities. Learn more and get involved at ndforpublicschools.com.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk, and we got a great show lined up. We have Senator Paul Thomas is going to be on later in the show. We've been talking a lot about property taxes, and Senator Thomas got in touch with me and said, you know, we really need to talk more about the ag perspective for this, because that's something people who live in rural communities are really pushing. They say they want more property tax relief for ag land. Most of the, Governor Kelly Armstrong / Representative Mike Nathy's plan really focuses on residential property tax relief. The ag people are saying they want a piece of the pie. Can we do it? We're going to talk with him in the second half of the show. But before we get there, we're going to talk with Ron Ness from the North Dakota Petroleum Council. Now, it's no secret that, most people know that the North Dakota's oil is hugely important to the state of North Dakota. I don't think people understand how profound and that's really saying something. All the hoopla we've had about the oil boom and everything over the years, understanding how profound the impact has been. I'm reading now from a press release sent out by Governor Kelly Armstrong's office. Now, this is according to a North Dakota State University study about the economic contributions of oil and gas exploration, extraction, transportation, processing, capital investments. The oil and gas industry in North Dakota directly employed just over 30,000 people. Indirectly, the oil and gas industry contributed to another 33,730 jobs. That's over almost 64,000 jobs total. Just in terms of employment, income, wages, and everything, that's a $5 billion impact. Oil and gas is 30% of the state's overall gross business volume. The oil and gas industry between 2008, now again, this is according to a study conducted for the Western Dakota Energy Association and the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation, tax revenues paid by North Dakota's oil and gas industry fiscal years 2008 to 2024 exceeded $32 billion. That's an enormous amount of money. I'm joined today. My co-host is the notorious JBELL, Jessica Bell. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm just really happy to be here, and especially to talk about something so exciting and important to North Dakota. We've seen such great growth and changes over the last 10 years in the oil and gas industry, and I'm excited to talk about where we are, and I'm also excited to talk about where we're going in the future.
Well, that is the most important question to me as well. Ron, obviously, it's a wildly successful run for the oil and gas industry in North Dakota. Well, I should say for North Dakota. I mean, the employment, the tax revenues, everything else, it's been great. I guess that's the question is, it's great. It's great to have the numbers. Where are we going from here?
Well, Rob, thanks for having me. And just a little bit about the study, maybe. Fortunately, we started this study 19 years ago, and we did a 2005 study. So this is our 10th study. But how valuable that is to have that baseline of where we were 19 or basically 19 years ago. This is 2023 data here. So at that time, the oil and gas industry, we were producing 92,000 barrels of oil a day. We had 3,300 mostly tired oil wells from non-Bakken formations. We employed about 5,000 people, and today, and we were a $3.2 billion industry, and that was front page of the Fargo Forum. A tractor and an oil well, both industries, in the a couple $1 billion each, and now we're a $49 billion industry, and we employ 63,000 people, and we produce up 1.2 million barrels of oil a day. It's, as you said, the rise has just been incredible. Now, what's the future look like? I think your question is one that we all need to be asking, and one that, we've been talking a lot with legislators and policymakers. Yesterday, the budget committee unveiled the new budget forecast for the final process in the legislative session, and we trimmed the budget by about $500 million. Now, $6.2 billion is what the state is going to collect in the last biennium in oil and gas production taxes alone, not including, we pay full sales tax, we pay full corporate tax, income tax, we pay sales tax on about $185,000 per well that we drill. Really no breaks in there. We pay basically a 10% gross production tax. So this study shows we paid about $1.2 billion in royalties to royalty owners. We think there are over 300,000 mineral owners in the Williston Basin. Most of those, of course, are underneath the Bakken. That's a pretty good chunk of people that are getting a check every month. So the future is all about technology. We are 100%. We have been producing this Bakken now for 20 years, and we're getting better at harvesting, but we've really been in harvest mode, especially under the Biden administration, and with COVID before that. What I saw is that we just moved to refining how we complete wells and how we get better at harvesting the oil that we know we're going to get. What has happened is we've moved out of the exploration phase. We're not getting more oil out of the rock, and of course, this Bakken oil is 2 miles down. It's embedded in the rock. We got to figure out how to. We discovered oil in 1951 in North Dakota, and it took us till 2008 and 2009 to figure out how to produce it out of the Bakken. So there's a lot to learn, but that next level technology is a super big thing, because with the best technology and all the world focused on this resource, out of every 100 barrels of oil, we're still leaving 85 in the ground. So if we can get another 15%, that's a doubling of the ultimate recovery, and it will add generations and generational wealth and opportunities for future North Dakotans. Without that, we're going to deplete this resource. We've just got to get into other formations. We got to get out of the box a little bit, and I think we've really been stymied over the last 5 years. That's a big concern for me.
As we look to the future, those technologies, of course, are really important. But another thing that's really important is making sure we have a market for our natural gas. Right now, kind of a byproduct of the process of getting oil out of the ground. I think we've got some constraints coming up here in the future. And what does that look like? And how can we best use that natural gas in North Dakota, find takeaway? All of our products that we produce here need takeaway markets. Is there a way for us to grow that opportunity for the use of natural gas right here in North Dakota?
Jessica, I think that's really an incredible statement, that it's a byproduct. I mean, we didn't know we were going to get this massive amounts of natural gas, and a lot of liquids in that gas: butanes, propanes, ethanes. So huge volumes, almost 3.2 BCF a day coming out of the Bakken. Now that number is just phenomenal when you think about where we were in In pre-Bakken days, we were producing like 180,000 MCF a day. So I think you're right. I think that's North Dakota. The oil is going to have to go where the markets are and where the refineries are. Dakota Access Pipeline takes almost 700,000 barrels of oil a day to the best refining market in the world, which is the Louisiana Gulf Coast. We were so fortunate to get that in place. It took that oil off the rails. But this natural gas, we've got opportunities. We are starved for natural gas in much of North Dakota, and particularly really everywhere east of Highway 83. You go to Underwood, Hazen, Beulah, they don't have natural gas. So Minot doesn't really have natural gas of quantities other than probably one line to service the city. So if you get natural gas to eastern North Dakota and utilize it throughout the Bakken, I think we've got great opportunities here. These data centers are probably the thing that are going to be the game-changing component that allows us. Pipeline companies are just transportation companies. They're nothing different than a railroad. They move products rather than trucks. They typically don't own the gas. They don't own the oil. They don't own the CO2. They just move it and they get paid by volume. So they've got to have somebody that's willing to put it on the pipeline. More importantly, somebody on the other end that says, we're going to buy it. Then you build a pipeline. And that's where so far we really haven't been able to get over that hurdle to get Bakken gas across North Dakota. But I really think what we've seen and just what I've learned since this legislative session started about the evolution of these data centers and the incredible demand, Rob. Microsoft, Meta, it's interesting. They now consider themselves energy companies.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, I don't know if you ever watched that movie, The Founder, about McDonald's, when, Ray Kroc has the realization that he's not in the restaurant business, he's in the real estate business. I think we're kind of having one of those moments right now. When you think of how much of our economy is running through the cloud, us talking right now is running through the cloud. After this show, I'm going to run this audio through an AI analyzer so I can get a transcript and make sure I quote everybody right when I open it up. I mean, all of that stuff is happening in the clouds. My kids are playing video games in the clouds. I mean, it's all happening, and we're going to need more of that stuff. And North Dakota is a good place to build it. I wanted to go back to something you said, though, about getting out of the box. You talked about we're gonna eventually deplete oil as a resource. When you say get out of the box, get into new formations, are you talking about more exploration within North Dakota, or what does that mean?
I am actually. Two different things. Number one, all the investment over the last 20 years has gone to the Bakken. Last year, I believe we drilled 15 non-Bakken wells in North Dakota, 600 Bakken wells. These are traditionally vertical wells that, they're going to generally produce a smaller amount of volumes, like a small farm, I would like to say, rather than the massive investment, an $8 to $10 million investment into a Bakken well. These vertical wells that, generally speaking, north and south of, north of Highway 2, south and west of Highway 85, maybe. But inside of the Bakken, there are all these formations that have produced 1 billion barrels of oil since the discovery in 1951. Nobody has really turned the drill bit horizontally in them. It's a whole new opportunity. In the Permian Basin, they've got 12 intervals where they produce really high quality oil out of. In North Dakota, there are 18 different intervals that have produced oil since the discovery, but we really are not exploiting them because, Rob, if I was to ask you and you were an investor, let's see, we should take your money, and we should go to North Dakota and how about we put it in a Mission Canyon well and by Tioga, North Dakota? You're going to say, why would you do that? The Bakken's one of the biggest discoveries of oil in the history of the world. We want our money going to the Bakken. So we're trying to unravel that a little bit. That just takes, now that means Rob is going to risk his $8 million as opposed to pretty much a sure thing.
I don't know what you think being a columnist and a podcaster pays, Ron, but I don't have $8 million sitting around.
The reality is you're not going to do that. So what we're talking about, the state of North Dakota is the biggest mineral owner. They're the biggest beneficiary of all of this. And as a state, we've got to try to, through research, have a whole bunch of people try it a little bit and share that information because, we got very lucky in the Bakken. Everybody remembers what happened in 2009, right? Market crash across the world. There was no place to put your money. There was no place to invest. That is right when the Bakken took off. We had every construction company. We had everybody looking to make a buck. We had workers coming here from all over the world, all over the country. We had all the great minds of the world coming here. We're likely not to see that again. And with that comes a lot of risk capital. Today, what we're seeing is just harvesting, really just harvesting going on. And we're just trying to get better at what we're doing already, but we're not exploring. We're not. And we kind of have to get back to that, I think, in this basin. And it's critically important for those of us North Dakotans to make sure that happens because where do you, Jessica, you were in the finance chair. Where do you replace $6 billion in tax revenue for the state of North Dakota if the oil price plummets or our production plummets 15 years from now?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. There's absolutely not a place for us to try and find revenues like that. And I love this study that really kind of started this conversation that shows with the numbers. I'm a numbers gal, exactly what this means monetarily for the state. And I really liked what you mentioned about the technology and looking in different formations to provide some sustainability for the industry as they move forward. Because every time when I was in the legislature, we tried to do a little something to make sure that we could attract some of those investments that you're talking about, those millions and billions of dollars back into North Dakota to help with the sustainability of the oil play as we look to the future. We got a lot of pushback because everybody just thinks that this is going to continue to happen, whether or not we try and attract investment or not. And North Dakota's, mindset of having a business environment that attracts different kinds of investments is so important. So what does the legislature have on its plate this session to try and attract some of those different technological advances to keep that play sustainable here in North Dakota?
Representative Craig Hedlund has House Bill 1483, which is a bill that was created in 2013, really in a non-Bakken, tried to encourage non-Bakken activity. it just creates a reduction in the tax rate. In North Dakota, we pay a gross tax on the oil. So if you make $1,000 in oil, you pay the first 10% comes off the top, despite whatever your costs are. So this would try to do that non-Bakken incentive. I think that's critically important to those rural areas north of the highway too, to try to attract some of these folks. We think now the banks and other investors might be interested because of the just the federal government supporting energy development and Rob's kids and my kids maybe understanding through the use of technology that the data centers, one thing is incredible is that they need reliable, affordable electricity to run AI centers. They can't do it on intermittent wind. They can use surplus wind, but boy, they got to be backed up. So they need oil, gas, and coal. And I think young people might understand what we're talking about now and the importance of these things when it's directly linked to their ability to use AI and use their phones. But in addition, the legislature is looking at, through the Oil and Gas Research Council, some funds to elevate research and inspire companies to go out and do pilots in these areas, Rob, because otherwise companies are going to just keep doing what they know is going to get them a return. But as a state, we got to get back to the original question I had a few minutes ago. Where are we going to get this money? Because we got to fund education, we got to fund schools, we got to fund roads. And if oil declines rapidly, it's why we created a legacy fund. So I kind of gave this preach last night to a group that legacy fund was created for a very distinct purpose. And we have to remember that it's there to ensure that our kids and their kids don't have to have this incredible tax burden all at once, and you can utilize those funds as oil funds decline. So, sometimes I'm looking at some of these bills that are earmarking even earnings off the fund for permanent uses. Property tax might be one thing. When we designed the oil legacy fund, we didn't know what we should use it for. We didn't know what we should leave the earnings for. We left it to the policymakers in the future of North Dakota to do that. But it's critically important that as we get into term limits, we get into all these things, that the insatiable appetite to spend cash has got to be recognized, that we need a huge stabilization fund because we just don't have anywhere. Rob, we're coming to you to get more money if the tax revenues, if you get rid of income tax, you reduce property tax, you do all these other things, sales tax kind of becomes a ticket, doesn't it, Jessica?
Yeah. Well, it's always been the danger, I think, is putting too many eggs in the oil basket. I mean, there's going to come a day where we don't have it anymore. And to your point as well about, the oil boom didn't just happen. I mean, we had to have, yes, the oil was here, and yes, sort of global market, brought a lot of people to our door, but we also had to have the right policies in North Dakota to allow it to happen. I remember when we were having the oil extract, the oil tax debate, several sessions ago, and it was like people were saying, well, we don't need to flatten the tax, because that's what we did, right? We took what was a variable tax and there were some triggers in there. We flattened it, lowered the top rate a little bit, and left it be. And people were saying, well, we don't need to do that. The oil's here. They're going to come and get it anyway. And I thought that was so foolish. Like, just because the oil's here, that's part of it, obviously. We also got to have the right policies in place. And North Dakota's done a pretty good job on that. Let me ask you something, because I think
can I just add? I have to add. I can't let that part of the conversation just slide by, because yesterday in the North Dakota Senate, I went and sat on the floor for the first time since I was actually a legislator pushing the button. They have every session, they have a memorial service for those legislators who have passed away over the last 2 years. And it is just, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't cry on the podcast, right? Okay, I'm going to get it together. I got to sit and honor Senator Dwight Cook one last time. Really, in my mind, I will be honoring him forever, and I'm so excited to get the opportunity to do it today. But he, you talk about the sales tax, you talk about flattening that extraction tax piece. He was such a key leader in all of those policies, and he is, I think, a very large part of the reason that we do have such a stable and wonderful source of income coming from the oil and gas field. And I just want to give Senator Dwight Cook props. It was really nice to honor him yesterday. Senator Rich Wardner gave the remarks on the floor, and he added some lovely color, and it just kind of took me back to the good old days of getting to work on tax policy with such a wonderful human. So I got to give Senator Cook props, and then you can go ahead and ask your question now, Rob. But
no, that wonderful. Senator Dwight Cook was just a legend, particularly on tax policy. It was a wonderful memorial service, which, by the way, is archived online. So if you didn't catch it, go watch. I sometimes think we don't honor the people who serve in the legislature enough, because it's a tough job. Ron, something I did want to ask you about, though, was carbon pipelines. We're hearing North Dakota is going to need the carbon to help with oil extraction in the future. We just saw in South Dakota. Now, to be clear, the Summit carbon pipeline isn't about the oil industry. That they're serving ethanol and they're bringing the carbon here. Maybe in the future, that's carbon that could be used, but it's not, that particular project is not really about the oil industry. But the opposition to it represents, sort of a political movement that doesn't like these pipelines. South Dakota, we saw a lot of national headlines about, I think, they were all but writing the Summit Carbon Pipeline's obituary. I think that's a little premature, because just because they can't use eminent domain doesn't mean they can't get voluntary easements. But you're watching all of this. North Dakota is going to need the carbon. This is important to our future. It's important to our future energy industry. But there's some political hurdles right now. What are you seeing there?
Rob, we've been studying enhanced oil recovery through the use of carbon dioxide since 2003 with the EERC. There's a project in a conventional field in Bowman County right now that's using industrial CO2. I like to make that distinguishing point. This is industrial CO2 that's coming from a massive gas plant in southwestern Wyoming up into Montana, over into North Dakota, into that conventional Red River field in Bowman County to enhance oil recovery. So the biggest question I think I've been getting in is, yeah, you can use natural gas. I think we're going to use natural gas. Nobody in the planet's figured out how to increase the productivity in shale oil. We have got to figure it out. We've got to get that doubling of that recovery in the Bakken that we think is there, and we got to continue to add research and get people to do this. But ultimately,
what is the recovery percentage on a well? Because that always shocks me when I hear that.
About 15%.
Yeah, we're leaving so much in the ground.
So, we just, with the size of the Bakken, the opportunity for us just to walk away. And again, the state's the biggest beneficiary in this stuff. Companies can drill their wells, deplete them, move on to Texas, move on to wherever in the world they want. But North Dakotans, we have to figure out how to utilize this resource, just like coal. We're crazy not to utilize 800 years of coal and leave it 800 years for 800 years. So, but the uniqueness about carbon dioxide and what it does is it mobilizes new oil off the rock. And you've got to keep that pressure up in that reservoir. Natural gas will help that. It'll do some of that. But CO2, as proven by EERC in Bakken rock, will mobilize new oil. New oil. That's what we're talking about here. Nobody's figured it out yet. But Rob, to your point, when we do, we're going to need massive amounts of CO2. And we have proven that, the industry will find and get that CO2. I didn't think we could ever move oil by rail. Wrote a white paper on it in 2005. 2015, we were moving 750,000 barrels a day of Bakken oil all over this country. So we will find a way. And I think, the demonization of carbon pipelines for safety reasons, is not confounded. All those things certainly have to be shown and validated, but having that pipeline within 100 miles of the Bakken is like building a railroad within 100 miles of New York City, right? If someday there's surplus industrial carbon that can go into that pipeline, because now we got to build a pipeline here for moving carbon to an oil field, which Minnesota's not going to like that. Many of these other states where there is industrial carbon supplies, generally going to have to come off of Chicago, those large metro areas. We're gonna hopefully utilize the carbon out of the coal plants, but it's just a fraction. And Bakken is 11,000 square miles. So
Yeah.
When somebody cracks that code and says this is going to double the recovery of the Bakken, guess what? Game on.
Well, I think a lot of our environmentalist friends and maybe friends on the political and the politics around the carbon capture stuff are very weird from an ideological perspective, because there's people on the right and people on the left. But I think our left-wing friends, I think sometimes they're a little stuck in maybe like the 70s, 80s, 90s idea of the environment, and they're not catching up to the fact that, yeah, we can produce carbon, we can also get that carbon and put it back in the ground and create a nice cycle where we're using what we're emitting and helping the environment along the way, and it's just a good thing. Can use these resources that we already know how to use, like coal, like oil, like gas. We know how to use these. We have the transportation set up. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just do them better. It makes sense.
And frankly, a lot of this blame has to go back to the IRA under the Biden administration, when they intentionally created a $25 differential between carbon storage and carbon utilization, such as in the Bakken. They did that very purposefully. They tried to disincentivize using it for enhanced oil recovery. And I think that started a fair amount of this rhetoric. And all of a sudden, now we have to fight. Why even if let's say you're Base Electric, they've got CO2 that's been going to Canada for an oil field for 20 plus years. That contract's going to end. they're going to bring it back to North Dakota. They're going to get paid $25 more a ton to put it in the ground than utilize it in the oil fields.
Yeah.
Well, if you're a board member at Basin Electric or a shareholder or one of their utility customer, one of the ratepayers like I am, you tell them to take the $25 extra and put it in the ground, right? Because they also have a capital investment they got to make to put that CO2 into a sweet Bakken field, what they didn't have to do into a sour oil field in Canada. So that policy turned the narrative on this, and Senator Brasso from Wyoming's got a bill that would create parity. And I don't care if it goes up, down, or whatever. It just can't be, we can't be disincentivized, and the Biden administration and the extreme left did that on purpose.
Ron, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Hey, Rob, thanks. Jessica, anytime. Went relatively too fast, so appreciate your time today. Tell Oban what he missed.
Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Just finished up our first segment with Ron Ness, which the future, first of all, the success story is wonderful. The future is bright. I mean, there's so many cool things that we can do, bringing carbon to our state, using that to enhance our recovery of the resources that are already here. There's just a lot of cool things going on for North Dakota. So glad to hear that story. But we're going to switch up gears now. Property taxes. Yes, we're talking about it again, but it is, I don't know, arguably not or let's say top 5 for sure, top 3 probably issues before the legislature. Everybody wants some property tax relief. And the perspective we've been talking about so far has been property tax relief for primary residences. So you own a home, you live in that home. We're not talking about rental properties. We're talking about a home that you own to live in. The Governor Armstrong / Representative Nathy bill gives, a tax credit towards that. The caps are a separate issue. All these bills have caps. I think hopefully the Senate, I'm hoping, puts in place a really strong cap, because I feel like that's the linchpin to whatever sort of relief we get. But the other side of it is there's a debate about, can we spread out the relief a little bit bigger, include agricultural land, include business land. Now, our guest, Senator Paul Thomas, he's a Republican from Velva, just to the southeast of the Magic City. Velva's a beautiful community, by the way. I love Velva. I could live in Velva, honestly. But he got in touch with me and he said, I don't know. Did you say I was being a little unfair to the or maybe not quite accurate? I definitely want the perspective of the rural communities on this property tax debate, because they're wanting some tax relief for ag land. And one of the arguments I made is, well, their residences are already exempt. Now, I realize it's not an automatic exemption. There's some qualifications on acreage and things like that. So maybe not everybody applies, but there is a farm residence exemption already. And to me, I guess my argument is we've been focused on the pain point, I think, are people's homes. And that's where we need to be focused. But Senator Thomas, you feel otherwise.
Yeah, well, thanks, Rob, and thanks for having me on. And I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of share the perspective of the agricultural community. And I think I'm going to lump in a little bit of the business community in this discussion, as well as maybe the two sectors that aren't being talked about as much as the primary residents and the whole discussion as we go forward with property tax. So, one of the things that, like you said, triggered my response to you, I guess, for the first time was, kind of the notation there that agriculture already gets this, we don't want to dilute this. And I just want to really, I guess, share with what I believe the rural caucus, the rural voice in the legislature is trying to accomplish. So as we look at with specifically House Bill 1176 that focuses on primary residence, so the base discussion here is, number one, whatever we do in property tax relief has to be sustainable. As we're looking at this session, roughly $500 million, give or take. That's the number that we're kind of looking at right now. 1176 provides that. We look forward, we look at legacy fund earnings as being the most talked about funding source for this property tax relief. So as we think about that, the 500 million, as we allocate that, if it's that, to just primary residents. Last Measure 4 discussions, the number used for the cost of all property tax relief was $3 billion. 40% of that is primary residents. So that's 1.2 billion roughly that's paid by your primary or by residents in North Dakota. So if we're going to provide $500 million of relief, we're talking real substantial relief to primary homeowners. 45% of their property tax liabilities would be removed. And in some cases, in my District 6 that I represent, I would say if we would have used the original Governor Armstrong plan of 1550, less than half of the homes in my district would be paying any property tax at all. And so as we look at that significant relief, the agriculture, and I'll just say the agriculture community is looking at it and saying, we support that. We're not arguing that primary relief does not need to be targeted, does not need to be sustainable. Our concern is, as we move forward and we're looking at legacy fund earnings to primary fund this today and in the future, those legacy fund earnings are for the entire state. And when we start narrowing down that legacy fund to a certain group of people that certainly are deserving of it, we're saying as we look forward, we would like to at least, at a minimum, coming out of this session, have that path forward be a broad-based property tax buy down for all classes of property. That, maybe this session, if we can get a little, that's great. But at least if we can have we're asking to have the conversation and provide a mechanism that at least that tool is there, and maybe that intention going forward is not just primary residents to zero for everyone, that we start taking an approach of, okay, as we move forward, let's provide that relief across all sectors that are paying property tax. And Rob, I'd be happy to explain some of the reasonings why I really believe that needs to be broad-based and how it can have negative consequences if it's not on the remaining taxpayer base of agriculture and Main Street business.
I would imagine Representative or Senator Thomas, sorry, I went back in time for a second, that when you make those arguments to those who are supporting this focus on primary residents, that they argue that farmers and ranchers, our agricultural community, don't pay and haven't paid property taxes on their primary residences for a very long time. What is your response to that? How should the state manage that?
Certainly. So when you look at the primary residence exemption specifically for farmers, and essentially it's as long as a large percentage of your income is derived from farm and ranch activities, and so that's what triggers that that for that exemption. So if you look back historically, and even if you look across property tax paying right now, in many of the counties, agricultural land provides the majority of the tax base for that county. So in certain communities, obviously, if you go to Ward County or you go to Cass County with the larger cities, it's not going to be as high as percentage. But when you get out in the other rural counties, the agricultural land is providing a majority of the tax. So now the land isn't always owned by that individual that's living in that home, but typically a fair share of that is. So to say that person isn't getting taxed it would be like saying a business owner that has a home in town, isn't paying tax either. He's certainly paying tax on the local grocery store as well as his home. Now, so why are we treating farm homes special? As you look back in history, one of the things that farmers are paying tax on still today is that 160 acres of land that we own. We pay all the way to the center of that 160 acres. So that township road that runs through there and that that the township has the easement on to use, farmers pay taxes on all of that. And so that is, in the original, what I've understood from the history of how that even came about was, one, they were already paying a large share of the taxes just based on the land. And then number two, it was based on they're already paying where the township has got public access and the public is utilizing. The farmers are paying for that and they can't utilize that. Some of the other arguments that, that support farmers paying taxes or that we're not taxed at all is, when we come to the local communities, we pay not only the 5% tax that everyone else does, but we pay that most oftentimes at 2% city sales tax. That's helping, those cities grow and develop and do all of that, the economic development tax or the road tax or all of those. So farmers are certainly participating in the tax base as well as everyone else. And this kind of goes to where I think in the agriculture community, we really feel we're taxed fairly right now. We really feel that the productivity formula that's in place for land bases that tax more off of a revenue ability to pay that tax. And you look at the amount that we're contributing as a whole, I think is very balanced with the commercial businesses. And, with this relief that we're proposing for the primary residents, I think you get to a very nice balance again of all of those tax-paying entities. The concern is, as we go forward, if we just focus on one sector of that, and in this case, the resident homeowner, where the majority of the votes are, the next time, I'm just going to use a community, for instance, and maybe former Representative or Senator Bell, Jessica, as let's just use Hazen or Beulah, for instance. If we'd have a special vote there, if nobody was paying property tax in Beulah, and you would have like community members say, it would be great to have a new hockey rink here. Everyone has some willingness to pay for their services and for their, wishes for a community. I think there would be probably many in your area community that'd be like, well, sure, I was paying $2,000, $2,500 on my home. I'm now paying nothing. I would gladly pay $500 a year for the next 20 years to build a new hockey rink. Well, if that would go to a vote of the people, with our caps and that we're proposing to do this increase in budget, there's probably going to be a very high willingness to vote that through. But if we don't provide that relief meaningful to the Main Street business in Beulah or to the farmers around Beulah, they're going to see that 3% or whatever that increase is over time. They're not seeing that reduced. And then they're going to get hit with another large property tax increase. And so that, I think, is the primary thing that our concern really is that we don't get that balance of burden out of whack, so that there's always this pressure, if you want to say, to keep taxes low, to keep our local county officials and city officials cognizant of all classes of paying property, that there's pressure to stay within reasonable budgets.
That's really, I really want two things from property tax relief. I want real relief, but I think we need a strong cap to stop the spending, because it seems like every time the state sent money to the locals, it gets gobbled up and property people aren't feeling the property tax relief. So I want a strong cap. And on the other side, I want to make sure that people feel real relief, because there's a political vector we have to continue. We need to stop people thinking that Measure 4 is a good idea, because if they continue to get high property tax bills, they're going to get more and more angry. And then eventually we're going to get something on the ballot. And what we get on the ballot might be stupid, might be really bad reform. So those are the two things that I want. I think you make an excellent point. I don't want to create a situation where a majority of voters in a given jurisdiction are uncoupled from the cost of government, and so start voting for bigger projects that are paid for by a minority tax base. I think that's very problematic. So I guess my question for you is, well, then how do we protect? What are you proposing to protect against that? Like, what does a good property tax bill look like to you that addresses that problem?
Or Rob, I think, one of the things we've really done, and compliments to Governor Armstrong with his leadership, has put out a really good plan, right? I think 1176 for starting the conversation and providing that first instant tranche of relief to where people are saying they, what we heard a measure for. You heard it in communities everywhere that primary residents really felt the pain on their local property taxes. But coming from a rural district, I will say that I also heard that from Main Street business as well as agriculture. And I will say that the voices probably were louder in the primary residence. And so the targeted relief is going there. But so how do we see this going forward? Well, one of the ways that I think that this could be accomplished for a while is Representative Lauser's mill buy down of school property tax. So the state's requiring, the levy of the 60 mills across all property or all tax paying classes. So if we just looked at that portion of it, the state picking up that as we go forward. So so throw this out for an example, Rob. Next biennium, we're likely going to see 120 million of extra funds available in legacy fund earnings. So if we're defining that we're going to be using legacy fund earnings going forward to buy down property tax to get to whatever that goal is for future legislative bodies, if we took that 120 million next session and had the intent that we were going to use that across all property taxes, that would roughly be about 10 mills of buy down, just as Representative Lauser's bill is this time. And I think we can essentially bolt that on to 1176. Or just add that in there, that this is, we're doing primary residence, we're going to do this portion. And then as we go forward, instead of targeting just primary residents, we're going to target all classes of property tax payers, and a school mill buy down would be one mechanism to do that. And another one that I've thrown out, and this hasn't gotten a lot of steam. Go ahead.
On what you just said, I just want to clarify. So you're saying bolt on Lauser's plan to the Armstrong-Nathy plan, and essentially it's we still have the credits that Governor Armstrong has proposed for primary residences, but then to give relief across all property sectors or property categories, we also have the mills buy down, the education mills buy down from Lauser's plan. That's what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And you depending on funding and where we come down this session, you could even bolt that on this session and not fund it. And that mechanism there is there then next session to apply the funds to. And so whatever, additional money we have going forward, we just continue to buy that down. So, hey, another idea, another way of accomplishing the same thing, and it also applies a different look at caps, is you do a freeze. So here was another concept that I threw out. You still do the you do the Governor Armstrong, Representative Nathy tax plan 1176. So we've been talking hard caps, 3%. You can't do that. So recognition in all the conversations has been, in most cases, taxing entities are going to raise their budgets 3%. So rather than cap them at 3%, if we froze at 2024 property tax budgets and the state just contributed 3% to each of those budgets, that 3% from the state's coffers. And basically, essentially what I'm saying then is we're telling Main Street businesses, we're telling agricultural landowners, what your tax bill is going forward. It's going to be this, because the state's going to be supplanting the increases in the budgets that are necessary for these local subs going forward. So it's just a different way of looking at that. I think that the idea I brought forward was a little too late in the discussions to really, gain much traction, but it would be another way of similarly accomplishing the same thing. You're putting the money out there. In one form, you're doing it as a mill buy down to get the money out to the political subs. Another way, you're just saying, here's you have your 24 budgets, you're collecting the property tax. The state will send you that 3% increase or whatever that necessary number is.
A lot of these conversations, property tax is such a complicated issue. because it's got so many facets to it. And so I just wanted to kind of boil down to what we think the problem is, and then maybe talk a little bit about that freezing mechanism. So, you've got the calculations on the front end with the mills and what your properties are worth, what that mill is worth, and then how much money a local jurisdiction can raise, what they're capable of raising is on that side of the formula. And then you've got the budgeting process where the local jurisdiction figures out how much money they need to do their business and provide services. And then they can take however much is available to them. They can take all of it. They can take some of it. They can take just a little bit of it. And I think that piece is where we're having a really hard time having everybody connect the dots, both property taxpayers as well as local governments. And so if you have a local government that has been, really diligent in how they're preparing their budget, and they've got, they're taking, let's say, 50% of what's available to them through the mill formula. And then you've got another local entity that's taking 100% of what's available to them through the formula, and we freeze them. How can we reward those folks who have been diligent in making sure that they're trying to keep property taxes low and doing a great job, and then not reward those who have not been doing such a great job with just an additional 3% increase over time?
So Jess, just a couple comments to that. I think one is the core real difficulties that we're having on all aspects, not just with the caps, is we're taking tax money that we're collecting from other sources, whether that be sales tax, income tax, excise, vehicle tax, whether it's oil revenues, and we're redistributing those to other controlling agencies to grant that money out. That is not, it's the same complaints we have with the federal government trying to do one size fits all. We're trying to do a one size fits all in an 80-day legislative session for entities that are all across the board, whether it's city size, whether it's, to your example, 100%. There's townships, and I'm taking this down to a rural percent. There's townships that might have a shuttle loading grain facility in their township where they're generating all kinds of revenue. The township right beside it has nothing. So we're to your point exactly. We're trying to take funds that aren't coming from these local areas. We're taking other funds, trying to supplant them into a wide range of budgets, a wide range of uses, and trying to figure out how this works. One of the things I've kind of said in as we're talking about caps, the legislative body wants to come out of here with caps, with restrictions on spending. And I think one of the goals is not to break anybody's budget, not to break anybody's ability to meet the needs of their citizens. But hopefully there's enough restriction there that we maybe start seeing some cracks in areas that it's not working. Like in this small community, this 3% cap doesn't work because of this. We don't cripple them, we don't break them, but maybe we crack it. And so that when we're back here 2 years from now, we can start adjusting how we do these caps. But I do think in order to obtain that, we're going to have to put some pretty heavy restrictions, whether it's, when we talk caps at 20, or if we talk caps at 3% spending or allocations locally, or whether we talk freezing budgets, however we do that, it needs to be in a point that causes a little bit of, and I hate to use this word, but a little bit of pain, I think, in the local communities. And to your point, there's some that are going to do just fine. They have room in there. And then there's some that have been extremely conservative in their budgeting. They're not even, maybe they don't feel they or their citizens are really getting their needs met with what they're doing now. And now we're restricting them even further. But unfortunately, I think with the situation we're put in, I think there's going to have to be some of those pain points, so we can clearly identify how to fix those, because all we're doing now is guessing how this is going to work or not going to work across all those local districts.
Well, and what if it does crack? I mean, what if somebody doesn't get the services that they want to be getting because they've requested the state to make all of these changes? I think there is a bit of an entitlement with the local services, especially, not saying that especially in the city where I live in Beulah that we're entitled, but I will say our services are mostly seamless. We had a Main Street project that was a whole thing here, but they come pick up my garbage every week. On the day they say they're going to, we requested an extra garbage can because I like to order too much stuff online and we have boxes. And so we got an extra garbage can the same day that we called to get an extra garbage can. I mean, these services that are provided by property taxes, I think, are so important to taxpayers, and they just maybe don't think about all of those different pieces that are involved. And so I don't know, maybe if it cracks and it breaks, people will realize that they actually do like paying to make sure that they have garbage removal services and a nice sewer line that's working and not backing up into their basement.
Yeah, and just I think you really kind of hit on something there that I want to touch on is initially when you would just reference that, you said all the things we like or want. And I think that's maybe what the caps will hinder some of that, maybe the likes or the wants that we want, that some people are willing to pay for that through their local property tax because they want that extra little bit of service. I don't think what the legislature is coming with the hard caps is going to break the critical services that are needed for government and for the local citizenry. So I think if we can find that area of where is that truly that the citizens in Belva or the citizens in McHenry County or Bottineau County or Renville County, where is that line of want and need coming from when they start getting restricted from it? And they start saying, yes, we're willing to pay more, or we're willing to have this conversation. So
I think I have thought for a while that we need a shock to the system because we've been stuck in a vicious cycle where people are upset about their property taxes. They go to their legislature and demand a solution. The legislature tries to buy down property taxes. That money gets gobbled up. Property taxes don't really go down. If anything, they go up. And then people are mad about their property taxes again. We've got to get out of that cycle. And I think part of it is people need to understand the relationship between the property tax bill and the local services they get. If you want, in a lot of cases, you need to pay for what you get, or you need to get what you pay for. I mean, that relationship, and I'm worried. And I guess that leads me to my last question, if you don't mind, is we talked a little bit early on about, if we just do the primary residence relief, we sort of unshackle people from the burden of paying for local government. But if we broaden it out, and I mean, we're going to start unshackling a lot of people, or at least reducing the burden on them, which is good, right? That's the goal of all this. But at what point do people sort of lose the connection between what they're getting and what they're paying for, because we're filtering it all up through the state, and we lose that local sense of responsibility to pay for what you get?
Well, we never want to lose that, Rob. And the other reason beyond, not being accountable, I've always felt this. I've served on the Belva City Commission. I've served on a lot of boards, and the less authority you have, the less real decision-making power you have on serving on a city council or a board or whatever that is, the less active and the less people, the fewer people that are going to apply and want to be part of that. So if we as a state continue to take over too much, so when you go to that local school board meeting, or you go to that local city council and you get elected, and all you get to do is rubber stamp what the state's telling you can do, or that you can spend your money on, we're going to lose local involvement. And we, in my opinion, that would be the worst thing that could come out of this, because again, as we are doing broad-based decisions here, everyone's different. Everyone's needs are different. Everyone's wishes are a little bit different. And it's those individuals that show up in those local boards and those local communities, make those decisions, and become the next leaders of today. So if we're not developing them, if we're not bringing those ideas and developing those people, we lose as a state. So I would never advocate that we take over this fully as a state without having the mechanisms there that the locals are controlling all of that, because that's absolutely critical.
Senator Thomas, thank you. So we even went a couple minutes over of the time you promised us. Thank you for being so generous with your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Jessica. I just think it's really important that the conversation is had, that these conversations here on property tax, we all represent our 17,500 people in our district, and we're all here working to try and come up with the best overall policies, whether it's tax policy or whether it's whatever we pass out of our Senate and House and send to the governor, that we're all representing a district and a constituency base, and we have to work together and hopefully come up with best solutions that benefit our entire state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
North Dakotans for Public Schools is dedicated to protecting and strengthening public education in North Dakota. United by the belief that public schools are the cornerstone of our communities, North Dakotans for Public Schools fights against harmful policies like voucher schemes that divert resources away from public schools. By bringing together educators, parents, school boards, and citizens, North Dakotans for Public Schools amplifies the voices of those who understand the critical role public schools play in shaping the future of North Dakota's children and communities. Learn more and get involved at ndforpublicschools.com.
Welcome back. Just finished up with Senator Paul Thomas about property taxes, and this is such a difficult needle to thread because there's so many things we need to balance. We need caps that are strong enough to stop runaway spending at the local level and make sure that this new relief that we're going to pass doesn't get gobbled up, that it actually gets delivered to the people. But we don't want the caps so strong that we, hurt local communities and their ability to meet real local needs. We want relief that's big enough to sort of head off more ballot measures about this. We may get ballot measures anyway, but what we want to do is erode political support for them by passing effective relief at the legislative level. But on the other hand, if we spread the relief out to too many people, it might not be enough to make a difference. I mean, this is difficult stuff. It's hard to find the balance on this.
It really, really is, Rob. And I do not envy those who are in charge of making these decisions this session. Property tax reform is just such a difficult thing to tackle because there are so many pieces of it. And like I mentioned in our conversation with Senator Thomas, you've really got two ways that you can look at it. You can look at capping the actual spending that's happening at the local level, or you can look at capping what their ability to raise those funds looks like. And I think anytime you start dabbling into the second side of that conversation in adjusting and capping how much properties are worth and how much that you can levy, and diving into those specific little formulas on taxable value, you really can get yourself into trouble on that side of the formula. So we need to really, I think, focus on our caps on the other side of the formula and making sure that what the local governments decide they want to spend is what is capped. Because no matter how you change the other side of the formula with how the money is raised and how much different properties are worth, you are always going to end up with the same burden. So whatever those local entities say they want to spend, that's what they're going to have the authority to do. So those and it's such a hard thing to explain, but you want to be able to address what the locals are actually spending, not what they're able to raise. And I think that's maybe the crux of the conversation that's going to happen in the Senate the second half. And then you've got all those other different pieces in there. What types of commercial properties, agricultural properties? I do agree with the senator on the mill buy down for education, in that it does provide relief across the board. But the question we didn't quite get to is one that you alluded to, of does that provide meaningful reform if you add those extra mills in? And I'm not familiar enough with the numbers to know what that looks like, but it's a question they're really going to have to grapple with here.
He didn't seem concerned about it because he was saying even if you don't fund it, if you just put the mechanism in place, he'd be satisfied for now. And with the idea towards funding it more and doing it over time. So, I mean, he's really kind of taking a long view on this. I did really like the discussion of there needing to be a shock to the system because we have got to sort of push ourselves. We are in a rut on property taxes. We have got to get out of that rut. And this seems like the time to do it. Like we just need to punt. If we make some mistakes along the way, we can fix them and we can iterate, but we got to do something different because our state cannot take more of this, and we're going to end up doing something. The electorate is going to get so mad, they're going to end up doing something stupid at the ballot box, and we need to avoid that at all costs.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We have gotten into such a rut, and I will argue still a little bit of an entitlement, especially with low income taxes. I don't start me on sales tax, but I will reference Senator Cook again with that three-legged stool. We've got all that oil tax rolling in. That's how we started this conversation. That's how we're going to be paying for these property tax buy downs, is with all of the revenue.
That's all. But that revenue is not going to last forever either.
No, it's not. And so I do worry long term about exactly how this all plays out. I think the legacy fund is a really great backstop to get us out of any trouble that we might have 30 years from now. But I'm encouraged by the longevity of the oil and gas industry here in North Dakota and all the exciting things that Ron talked about. When you couple that with really meaningful tax relief, I think that's a really great thing for the citizens of North Dakota. I just want to make sure that they fully appreciate that, because you hear all sorts of pieces that kind of get us to this place that people seem to want, which is oil and gas pays all of our taxes and I don't pay any, and I want all the things that I want anyway. And that's just not good for the state.
That would be a mistake if we did that. It would be a terrible, terrible mistake. And don't get me wrong, I don't love paying taxes either. But the one we have to maintain a relationship between the people and the government. Like we have to maintain that the size of the government impacts you. If it gets bigger, you're going to pay more. If it gets smaller, you pay less. We have to have that pricing. The government has to be priced appropriately for the voters. And we need to be careful not to leave that behind. I wanted to wrap up the show. You obviously former senator, served there for a long time. We saw yesterday a bit of a spectacle on the Senate floor, not a long debate, but certainly an intense debate about the same-sex marriage resolution. It went down. It failed. I'm glad it did. My personal feelings is it was mean-spirited. It did nothing. It was backed by not a very good group out of Massachusetts that says a lot of ugly things about the LGBTQ community. The interesting thing is that the resolution, now to be clear, resolutions typically don't have, in the Senate, typically don't have a recorded vote. They're typically done by voice vote, those sorts of resolutions. There was a request that was made or not a voice vote, a verification vote. It basically not a recorded vote. But there was a request made by Senator Josh Boucher, who's obviously very emotional, first openly gay man to serve in the legislature. So this is an issue that's near and dear to his heart for understandable reasons. He stood and requested a recorded roll call vote. And when that happens, procedurally, 8 senators need to stand to indicate that they support a recorded roll call vote. They only got 6, including 2 Republicans, Senator Sean Cleary and Senator Michelle Axman. I thought I was really disappointed that they didn't record that vote, given that there were hundreds of submissions for testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Ada's gotten all sorts of attention. Lots of North Dakotans in the LGBT community, outside of the LGBTQ community cared about this. And I'm not just talking about the opponents, the proponents cared a great deal about this as well. I don't understand how they don't record their votes there. I think that people are owed a record of how they voted on something like that, given the intense public interest. How do you feel about it as you watch that? You were on the floor yesterday. How did you feel about that?
I was on the floor yesterday, and I left prior to that debate occurring. Although I was invited to stick around for it, and I said, I probably have seen my own fair share of social issues that have been tackled on the Senate floor. I think I'm probably good. I don't need to experience this. Plus, I had to drive a car of teenagers up to Watford City to watch our boys play in a region basketball game. So, I had priorities yesterday, as we all do, and I think that that for me personally, my biggest takeaway from yesterday is that it's dead. It needed to die, and it died. And I am very, very, yes.
That's progress. I have a friend of mine who is gay, and he's a Republican. And he was talking about, even before I wrote, he said, Rob, I know you're going to be critical of the fact that they didn't record the vote. He goes, I really want to stress, this is progress. He goes, 10 years ago, he goes, I don't know if that would have been possible, but it happened today. And that's progress, and we need to be happy about that. And so I made sure to write my column. Like, I don't want to take away from the fact that we have progress on this issue. That bill failed. That's good. And so I don't want to make this too big. I would have, I guess if I was a senator, I would have voted for a recorded vote. I think the people are owed that.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are a lot of people frustrated with the two Republican senators who stood up to have the recorded vote. But I applaud all of them for tackling this really, really difficult issue in a way that was effective to make it go away, because it needed to go away. And I say this coming from, this was my representative in District 33, Representative Bill Twite, who introduced this resolution in the House. It was not needed. It was cruel and unnecessary with absolutely no purpose. And so, because all it does is tell the Supreme Court that he thinks that they were wrong, and that the North Dakota, ultimately, if it passed, the North Dakota legislature thinks the Supreme Court was wrong, which has absolutely no impact on anything other than making people just feel really awful. It's the law of the land. It can't be changed. And so requiring people to take a public stance on this issue almost 10 years after the Supreme Court has issued their ruling on it just seems so ridiculous to me. And so while I think there's arguments on both sides about the board being lit up or not being lit up, I'm just glad it's gone, because we shouldn't have had to deal with it in the first place.
Would you have voted for a verification vote if you'd been on the floor?
I was thinking about that yesterday as I was sitting there. It was, of course, taking me back. It was really weird to sit on the floor again, and from a different perspective. The floor looks different from all the different seats, FYI. But, I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because one thing that I learned when I was in the legislature is you don't know what it's like to push the button on those issues until you have sat in that chamber day after day after day and getting constituent emails and knowing, like, you just get a different feel for an issue in a way that you just can't. It's just so hard to see from the outside looking in. So I'll respect my fellow senators and all of their decisions and how they came to those choices individually, and not give my opinion what I think I might have done, because that's just a really tough thing to do unless you're sitting in those seats.
All right, fair enough. It is tough, and I am glad it's gone, and it is progress. And with the North Dakota's ban on same-sex marriage is still in the Constitution, although it's basically enjoined from being enforced because of the Supreme Court ruling. And the Supreme Court could overturn that ruling one day. We certainly saw that with Roe v. Wade. And I'm even sympathetic to the ideas that the Oberfeld decision was inappropriately decided. I feel a little differently about that one versus abortion, because we're talking about an association right. And there are association rights in the Constitution. You have a right the free association. It's protected by the First Amendment. You can associate. It's what protects your right to join a labor union or join the NRA or what have you, or join a church. Part of that, obviously, freedom of religion is also protected, but you're allowed to associate yourself. So why wouldn't you be allowed to associate yourself with another consenting adult? There's a legal argument to be made there. But I'm sympathetic to the idea that the Supreme Court overstepped, and I would rather see these issues be solved in the states. And I'd like to get that language out of North Dakota state constitution, even if it's symbolic at this point, because I want to send a message to all our friends and neighbors and sons and daughters and aunts and uncles and everybody else who's in the LGBTQ community that you're wanted here, that you're one of us, that you're North Dakotan too, and we want you here. That's the message I would like to send them. And I would like to render the Supreme Court decision irrelevant by changing North Dakota's law. That's what I'd like to see. But
I'm all in. Let's do it. Wait, I don't have time to do that, but yeah, I'm absolutely.
That would be a lot of work because you had to gather signatures and put it on
that whole process.
You think it would pass? The North Dakota News Cooperative had a poll out, and they measured 56% of people opposed the resolution, just 36% supported it. I've been feeling for a while that something like that could pass in North Dakota. I think attitudes have just shifted.
Yeah, I think absolutely it passes. I think it passes wildly. And hopefully we see it on the ballot at some point, because I really would like to put this issue to rest and send that same message to all of our friends in that community. We want you here. We're happy to have you here. And there's just that would make my heart very happy.
It would make mine too. Well, J Bell, that's it. We're gonna put a pin in it there, and for next week, Chad obviously he'll be back next week, and I should look ahead to what we have on the show coming up next week if we had anybody booked yet. I know we have on Friday we have Julie Fedorchak is going to be on Plain Talk for.
Oh, that's exciting! Darn, can Chad go on vacation again?
Well, you have to ask him. She'll be on, and Chad's not on vacation, by the way. He's working. He'll get mad if I don't put that disclaimer in. She's going to be on. I think I'd have to look back. I think that's the first time since she's been sworn in. We've been so focused on the legislative session, we haven't given our federal delegation much attention. So looking forward to having her on the show. So that should be.
You're going to be so excited to hear about all the fun things she's doing out there. I've gotten to visit her out in the Capitol, and she's on fire. She's got great plans, and she's really working very hard.
I think it's great. I have some questions, and I kind of want to get this with Ron Ness too about the Trump admitted the trade wars and everything and the impact. When I looked at that revenue forecast we got yesterday, wasn't a bad forecast, downgraded a little bit, but not terrible. We're still in good shape. That being said, you start reading through what they're saying about crops and the uncertainty with trade and the uncertainty with energy. There are some landmines out there with the way the Trump administration is doing things. And I am very afraid we're going to hit some of them.
Well, I'm so glad we get to talk about the Trump administration today, because there was just a flurry of deregulation coming out of the EPA this week. So you've got them saying that they're going to take a look at the 2009 endangerment finding, which is what allows greenhouse gases to be regulated in the first place. They're then going to take a crack at the 111 rules, which is the specific regulation on carbon capture. And that it went all the way down the line. They announced that they will be taking a look at everything that affects the industry. And I am just so excited to watch them get organized and put the work in and really tackle these issues that are affecting the price for consumers on a daily basis, to attack them at their core and really get some durable rules put in place that can last through a Democrat administration for 8 years, for 4 years, for 8 years, so that the fossil fuel industry and the energy industry can just do their business every day and do it well.
I'm excited about all that stuff too. I have almost zero confidence that the Trump administration can put in place anything that's going to be durable and survive a Democrat. And I think it speaks to the dysfunction in Washington, D.C. right now, where we're relying on the executive branch to do everything. And it's one of my questions for Julie Fedorchak. Congress has got to be involved, because you know what's durable is federal law. if we make the law and quit allowing federal agencies to make the law, Congress has got to step up. And I'm afraid they're too busy being Trump's lackeys right now, the Republican majority.
Aw,
And
that's not true. That they've got you. I am so excited for you to have Julie on because, or excuse me, Congresswoman Fedorchak, because she has got so many ideas and so many bill concepts that she is ready to put forward. The challenge is going to be in the Senate. I think that's where we're actually going to see a difficulty in getting some of these policy pieces passed because for the listeners, if you've got a policy issue, you've got to get 60 votes in the Senate, not just a majority. And so that's where Congress struggles so much in being dysfunctional, is that it's really tough to get something through the Senate, even when you have a majority in the House and then a Republican White House. And so, yes, I think we absolutely need to encourage Congress to keep putting those ideas and bills forward. But in the meantime, I have full confidence that this administration is going to be putting every effort forth that they can to make sure that we've got rules in place that can survive into the future and keep American energy dominant again. Rob, I'm all in.
We share the same goal. I'm just the way they're going about it. It seems all style and little substance. And by substance, I mean stuff that's going to stick. I don't think they're going to do it. And I am worried. I mean, we kind of segued away from it. I am worried about what some of this trade war stuff is going to do to our state. I'm worried when Canada is literally the most important trading partner for the state of North Dakota. It's like 80% of our exports. That number may be right, but it's the very, very strong majority of our exports are going to Canada. Our Canadian friends are vitally important to our economy. Tourism, agriculture, energy, across the board. It's important. And some of the childish things we're seeing where we're taunting them, we're calling them the 51st state. It's disrespectful and it's unnecessary. And I'm wondering how much North Dakotans are going to have to hurt to pay the price for some of that stuff.
Oh, well, you make a very good point there, and it's certainly not my style. I shake my head occasionally in trying to figure out what the overall goal is, but I think I've talked about this before on the program. My naivete does set in occasionally, and I do trust the process and the system, and I really do hope that this works out for North Dakota in the long run. And I know one thing for certain, that whatever it is that happens during this administration is going to be better for North Dakota long term than what happened the last 4 years.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I hope you're right. We're going to stop there. Thank you so much for listening. Once again, Congresswoman Fedorchak on Friday next week. Thanks. Subscribe, like Plain Talk ND on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, all those places. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. I don't know what you think being a columnist and a podcaster pays, Ron, but I don't have $8 million sitting around.